If you're like me, you watch a lot of Pokemon content. Collection videos, PSA returns, pack opening videos, Pokemon news, auction recaps, and even deck building and competitive play videos. There really is something for everyone in the Pokemon YouTube space. But there's one type of video I see filling up my recommended feed more and more every day: Pokemon investment videos. Now, to be fair, I have an eBay store and sell cards myself, and I regularly discuss the Pokemon market here on my channel, so these recommendations make logical sense. But seeing all these videos makes me wonder, how easy is it to actually make money replicating some of these strategies, especially for someone new and inexperienced to buying and selling Pokemon cards? I decided to do an experiment, and today we're breaking down the results. Would these Charizards be cause for celebration, or would I end up getting burned? I'm Pokemon Classics, and I invite you to join me for this episode of The Truth About Pokemon Investing. This is the Celebrations Charizard, a reprint of the original base set Charizard from 1999, one of, if not the most iconic Pokemon cards ever made. During Pokemon's 25th anniversary, a specialty set called Pokemon Celebrations was released, featuring a number of classic reprints from early Pokemon TCG history, including this Charizard. Now, Celebrations is a small set and generally pretty easy to grade, but out of all the cards in the set, this Charizard is the most expensive one, ranging from about $60 to $80 raw and about $160 to $200 in a PSA 10. Now, you guys know that I love the classics, so this experiment was perfect for me. I decided to allocate about $400 to purchasing 5 raw Celebrations Charizards, have them graded, and then resell them. It sounds easy enough, but as it turns out, there were a few challenges to this process, and the first was sourcing. Now, these cards aren't hard to find, but when it comes to flipping, condition is everything. Currently, the Celebrations Charizard has a 67% gem rate, making it a fairly easy card to grade. But even a dot of edge wear on the back or a slight misalignment of the centering could be the difference between a significant profit and a sizable loss. I periodically browsed eBay through June to July looking for the cards that I thought had the potential to grade well, until I finally found my 5. And I have to tell you, these were some really nice looking cards. Of course, sourcing the Charizards was only the first step. Next, I had to grade them. And if you're new to grading, the process is actually pretty easy, but it is time consuming, and unfortunately, as I would find out, prices for this card would change drastically by the time they returned to me. From start to finish, the grading process took almost exactly 3 months, and in that time, the average price of a PSA 10 had fallen from about $200 down to about $180, a loss of 10% of its initial value. This wasn't a great sign, but I was committed, so there was no turning back now. Finally, on October 25th, the results were in. The first card I purchased cost $85.90 after taxes and shipping, and it graded a 10, adding approximately $100 of potential value. Now, it's important to note there are some additional expenses when selling these cards on eBay, including the grading fee at $15 per card, eBay selling fees of 13.25%, plus an additional 30 cents per sale, and the shipping cost of approximately $5 to $8 per card. After factoring all of these expenses, though, this was still a nice $54.29 profit. The second card, which cost me $77.31, also graded a 10, and this time leaving a slightly stronger profit margin of $62.88. At this point, I was feeling pretty good. After all, I had figured I'd need just 3 out of 5 to receive Gem Mint grades to at least make back my initial investment. Unfortunately, Charizard number 3 was ready to torch my optimism. This one graded a PSA 9, which in most situations would still be an excellent grade, but for reselling purposes, not so much. Assuming this card sold for a market average of $80, and adding to the fact that it cost me $83.75 plus other expenses, this card would actually lose me about $30.31. If someone was submitting cards in mass quantity and didn't know how to accurately pre-grade, or simply had an unusually strict grader, I could see how these losses could quickly add up. Fortunately, Charizard number 4 got me back on track, and it's a good thing too, because this one cost me more than any of the others at $86.06. After the other expenses and fees, this card would add on another $54.13 in profit. Finally, the 5th Charizard managed to end the submission on a strong note, receiving my fourth PSA 10. At $75.27, this card would also provide the most profit margin at $64.92 after expenses. So just to recap and further break down the numbers, the total expected value of these 5 cards came out to be $825 with an initial cost of $408.29. Now, that sounds amazing. It is, after all, more than a 100% return, but I think a lot of Pokemon investment channels leave out some important details here. Although I only paid $408 for the raw cards, there's also $75 worth of grading fees, $110.80 in eBay seller fees, and $25 in shipping fees to factor in, bringing the total expenses to $619.09. After these adjustments, we're left with $205.91 in actual profit, which is still a hair over 50% on my initial investment. Of course, we can't forget about taxes though. Now, everyone's tax rates are different depending on your income levels and where you live, but personally, I'm a full-time teacher with a W-2 and a sole proprietor with a Schedule C, so my tax obligations on these sales would look something like this. About 22% of the profit allocated to federal income tax, and about 6.85% of the profit allocated to state income tax. And if you're operating as a business and deducting eligible expenses, then there's also a 15.3% self-employment tax, which covers Social Security and Medicare contributions. When all is said and done, $90.90 of the $205.91 will be going back to Uncle Sam. You know what they say, death and taxes, right? Thinking about this from a post-tax perspective, that still leaves $115.01, or an average of $23 per card. Although this is nowhere near the $417 of profit it appeared at first, it is still a 23.8% return on my initial investment of $483.29 for a fairly passive and enjoyable job of sourcing, grading, and selling Pokemon cards. Taking all 3 phases of this into account, that includes scrolling through eBay listings, preparing cards for grading, completing submission forms, photographing slabs, creating eBay listings, packaging and shipping items, and keeping accounting records up to date, I've probably invested about 8 hours of my time, and so that brings us to some important considerations from this experiment. The first thing to consider is the reproducibility of this experiment. As we've seen earlier, the Celebrations Charizard is a relatively easy card to grade. However, even pack-fresh cards can have light wear and poor centering right out of the pack, and the more mainstream this play becomes, the fewer raw gem mint candidates will be readily available. Personally, I benefited from an unusually high gem rate of 80%. However, I have been grading for over a decade and was extremely selective on the cards I purchased for this experiment. If even a few more of these cards had received PSA 9s, breaking even would have become a best-case scenario, and if all of them received 9s, well, then we'd be looking at about a $150 loss on top of the time investment. Which brings me to my second point. There's always some risk involved, especially when grading. Not only is there some risk involved in the actual grading process, but there's also the grading timeline to consider. In my case, it took 3 months to receive my cards back from PSA, and in that time, the price of a PSA 10 dropped by about 10%. Often, many of these speculative flips can quickly decelerate in value shortly after their initial release. There's also the opportunity cost to consider of what else you could purchase or invest in during that 3-month span. Obviously, 3 months isn't that long of a wait, especially compared to just a couple years ago when PSA closed down and had a backlog of over a year to dig through. Still, depending on how much money you have wrapped up in one of these speculative grading flips, the lack of immediate liquidity can be difficult for some individuals and businesses to deal with. Finally, there is a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes. The learning curve for new sellers is certainly not insurmountable, and information has never been more readily available, but it does take some experience. Searching through listings, assessing conditions, setting up online accounts, submitting cards for grading, creating listings, taking product photos, shipping packages, and maintaining business records are some of the many steps that go on behind the scenes. That's a lot of work for most people, especially without a guaranteed return on investment, which could potentially turn negative. So here's the big question. Is it possible to make money as a Pokemon investor, and is all of this even worth it? To answer this question, I turn to one of the best in the business. For many people, the challenge of operating a Pokemon business is fun, and there are several ways you can potentially optimize your profit margins much more effectively than I did in this experiment. And if anyone knows how, it's Dan of Catch 'Em All Collectibles. Now, Dan's a friend of mine, a full-time Pokemon seller on eBay, and a fellow YouTuber. More importantly, he's often credited for popularizing Celebrations Charizard and is rightfully regarded as the king of optimization.
Charizard Celebrations is just one card. This is one card that I just so happen to quite frequently work with. But there are a lot of other cards out there.
Anyway, I reached out to Dan, showed him my numbers, and asked him for his critique.
Yeah, I mean, you did great here. You did a great job. 80% gem rate on a card that has overall about a 65%, or maybe 2 in 3 cards will grade a 10 by expectation. As you can see by your numbers, your 9 lost you $30, but your 10s won you almost 60. So your 10 won you almost double what your 9 lost you. As far as, again, 80% 10 rate when the market's getting 65%, your expert tier right there, that's a solid A+ as far as pre-grading ability, especially doing it from photos. It's tough to do from photos. You'll get experience as you go. The only thing that jumps out at me a little bit that I think you could work on, a little bit quicker in your sourcing, a little bit quicker. You have 8 hours for the time investment on 5 cards. I think you can refine your processes to where you can be a fair bit quicker than that. That's my one thing, but overall, it's a solid A+. You smashed it out of the park.
Now, I have to say, it's pretty validating hearing Dan compliment my numbers, but I wanted to press him a bit. I followed up by asking him the important question. So now that you've seen my numbers on the Celebrations Charizards, we're thinking for other aspiring collectors, people that are new to buying and selling on eBay and thinking about getting started, what types of tips or strategies would you provide to optimize that sale pattern and perhaps maximize their profit margin?
One optimization I would say is be very choosy, be very selective in what you end up buying. That's going to be a lot better than trying to nickel and dime the buy side and end up buying PSA 8s or PSA 9 quality cards. So getting that 10 rate as high as possible, which you achieve very well, is a major part of it. I am not a tax professional, bit of a meme on my channel, tax advice conversation, but per the IRS, if you are intending to profit, if you are doing this purchases for resale, you are not supposed to pay sales tax on. You can get a sales tax exemption, and the end consumer pays sales tax on the purchase. So don't just go straight to the post office with no postage on your thing and then pay the full retail rate. eBay has available to us significant discounts to the rates that are retail rates at your local post office. So definitely check out eBay. Buy your shipping label right through there. It's automatically uploaded. Seller protection is a thing. So if or when your buyer item gets delivered and they claim it's not, eBay has your back there. So many considerations all in one, but I think that's a nice little start. And be sure to like and subscribe to Pokemon Classic because he puts out a lot of great information to help you along your journey.
Dan's advice was simple yet practical and seemed to fall into one of 2 categories: lowering costs and maximizing efficiency. After our conversation, these were my key takeaways. Be selective about cards you purchase. Look for opportunities to buy cards in bulk to lower shipping costs. Pursue sales tax exemption as a business to avoid paying tax twice. And save on shipping and packaging fees with discounted eBay rates. Now, if you have an eBay store, there are even quarterly coupon codes that can be used to purchase eBay branded shipping supplies like bubble mailers. But hey, every little bit counts. Unfortunately, the Celebrations Charizard won't be making me rich anytime soon, but it was a surprisingly fun and effective strategy for making a little extra money in the hobby. Obviously, flipping Pokemon cards isn't for everyone, and it does take some investment of time and money, but even on a small scale, I have to admit, it can be profitable. You guys will have to let me know what you think about this investment strategy down in the comments below, and if any of you out there are looking for a PSA 10 Celebrations Charizard, I still have several I need to sell in order to fully conclude this experiment. There's a link to my eBay store down in the description. Finally, if you enjoy business-related content, don't forget to subscribe and visit Catch 'Em All Collectibles on YouTube. Dan is a great source of information, and I appreciate him for coming onto my channel to share some advice. Anyway, that's going to wrap it up for this one. I'm Pokemon Classics, reminding you that the classics never go out of style. Stay well, everyone, and we'll see you with the next video. Bye, everybody.